Welcome to Property People, the show for anyone with a passion or interest in property. From design, build, purchase, sale, and everything in between, this show is for you. I'm your host, Andrew Radigan, and I'm the director of Radigan Real Estate, an agency that helps clients buy and sell property in Ireland over €500,000. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hello and welcome to another podcast with me, Andrew Radigan of Radigan Real Estate. Today I'm going to be meeting David Murphy. He's a corporate photographer based in Dublin. You're very welcome, David. How are you?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, very good.
Great to have you here. So we're going to dive straight into it. No waffling today as it's a Friday afternoon and it's raining outside, so we're going to keep busy. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been a photographer since my teen years as an amateur, and I kind of just got into photography through marketing. So I studied marketing first, and through that I got a job in sales, which I really disliked. But while I was working in a company, they just asked me to do photographs, knowing that I was an amateur photographer. And they paid me a good amount of money for doing that. So I said, right, this is where I want to go. I went to college. I spent 3 years studying for a certificate in photography in Kevin Street. And then I did an apprenticeship with one of the top advertising photographers in the city at the time called Walter Pfeiffer. And then set up my own business in 1989 and have been working for the Irish small and medium enterprises since then, making images for websites, brochures, and basically anything that people need shot.
Wow, so this was really kind of a passion play from day one. You did originally start off on a different path, and one simple job you were given led you to realise that, wow, this is something I really enjoy.
Well, I always loved photography, but I didn't realise that I could make a living from it until that. And that pushed me into that direction, and I've loved every minute of it since. Well, almost every minute of it. But yeah, it's been a really interesting ride.
Isn't that a fascinating outlook to have? Because oftentimes people do what they think they should do as opposed to what they love, and almost their hobby or their pastime becomes, well, I'll do that when I get the opportunity. Whereas you were able to find out, wow, gee whiz, I can make money from doing what I enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nice opportunity to be thrown into, because literally it was thrown into it. And then the opportunity to go to college as a mature student was really good. I didn't need a huge leaving cert because my leaving cert was pretty rag order. And it was just the passion that led me through it. So I was able to follow through and do the things that needed to be done to get where I needed to be, which is where I am now, in a studio in Dún Laoghaire.
Wow, fantastic. And so talk me a little bit about, because I think one of the big misconceptions people have about photography is, and we've talked about this in the past, is someone will assume you are XYZ type of photographer. What is a corporate photographer, and what way does that play a role in how you structure a session with someone, as opposed to what people would assume it might look like if they've had it done privately in the past?
For corporate, my aim is to produce images that tell the story of what somebody does. It's not just about a picture of a pretty face or a pretty lighting. It's about getting somebody to understand themselves what they want to say with what the images we're making are going to do for them. When I do a session with somebody, come into the studio, we'll sit down and talk about their business. Now, while I'm talking to them, their business might be accountancy, it might be app development, it might be absolutely anything. I'm not really listening to what they're doing, I'm listening to what their face is telling me while they're doing it, so that I can understand what will tell the story, making expressions in front of the camera. So when we get in front of the camera, then I can pull those expressions back, and that will tell the story of the passion that somebody has for what they do, no matter what it is.
So you're starting off with building rapport, and I think you find that then that person's unique character comes through that rapport, that you make the time at the beginning to understand. Like you said, not all accountants are created equally. On paper they have the same job, but their personalities is what sets them apart. And you're trying to not pull it out of them, but almost get them to, without realising, give it to you.
Yeah. The first few minutes of coming into a session, and normally I do a 90 minute session, but the first 20 minutes is always spent with the chat. Two reasons. One, obviously to get those facial expressions out, but also that somebody's comfortable sitting in the studio and comfortable with me, and they know where I'm coming from when I'm kind of asking those questions with the camera of what they want to give me for the image.
And I mean, we're in your studio here during this podcast, and you can see that someone who isn't familiar with you or the process could feel almost quite nervous about what's to come. So that 20 minutes lays the groundwork of personality, interpersonal skills, trust as well, because when you ask them to do something, they understand that there's a method to your madness, and not that it's a mad project, but there's an element to it. And I think that's probably something that people probably take for granted, because we all have assumptions when you see an image that it was taken very simply, like we would all do when we're on a summer's day, of a tree or a whatever it might be, a landmark. There's a huge amount to it that actually plays a role in how the image turns out in the end, and that's a big part of it.
Totally. When the amount of equipment and what we call modifiers, so the light is a flash, it goes off, but the modifiers, I use different modifiers for different situations and different people, and even different scenarios with lighting to capture the person themselves. Some people just want a big white background which can tell one story, and other people use different types of backgrounds or location. The studio can travel with me on location to your offices or outdoors or to wherever it is you want to do. So all that is done initially to get you comfortable in front of the camera with all this lighting, and these things are, big soft boxes around can be quite intimidating for people, and a lot of people don't like having the photograph taken. So coming in, getting comfortable with me is a good start, that you can feel a lot more comfortable when we start pointing a camera at you.
And it works well for both parties, because you have someone who understands where you're trying to come from, and you also have someone who would hope that you have their best interest at heart as well, rather than shoot and charge, take 5, 6, 15 photos and they're gone. And I think we all know what that's like when you get the end result of an amateur photo at a wedding and you're like, you didn't catch me eating that or eating that way. So there's a big role that plays in it as well. Yeah,
very much so. It is a relationship that has to be developed quite quickly between the photographer and the subject. So it needs that few minutes of just chat and getting to know each other.
So there's a big communication piece to that as well. It's not just the physical equipment side. And on that note, I think a lot of people would have, as I said, assumptions about photography. What would be the biggest misconception that you come across when it comes to look at people who are either taking into account what they think corporate photography is, or profile shots, or what would you see is the most common misconception according to people you meet?
The time it takes. I think a lot of people think that they can come in, get snapped and leave again. And if they do that, and there are photographers, there are people who will do that you come in and you get your white background shot and you're in that in 20 minutes and it's done. But those photographs aren't going to tell a story. They're going to be quite similar to a lot of what's out there already. What I try and do is move away from those and bring your personality, your own self into the image, so that when it goes out there, when it's put up, it's unique to you, not necessarily in the background, not necessarily in where we're shooting, but that the expressions are yours, and that you need to be comfortable in front of the camera to be you in front of the camera. So people don't actually realise just that little bit of extra time, little bit of extra effort on both parts, my part and the subject's part, to make the image that tells their own story.
Which is really interesting, because it's also, the photo lasts the test of time. So that small investment of time and energy in getting the right presentation. I mean, we're all quick enough that profile shot will then be put across various social channels, various advertising campaigns, but that's an investment in what will then, if it's shot correctly and really gets the end result, actually creates the value add for them going forward, almost in perpetuity.
Yes, yeah. Certainly, when you have a photograph that you're really happy with, you're going to use it more, and that helps you get your image out with. And the idea of having a photograph is somebody can relate to you from the website, from the social media. They know who they're going to meet, and they have an idea of the person and the engagement that they can have with that person. So trying to get that confidence and reliability into the facial expression to come across the page is what we're working towards.
It's interesting, and I think almost like someone who gets their car serviced regularly, how often should someone in a corporate setting take a view to either reviewing their media, and obviously you're in photography, so you'd like to have repeat customers and build relationships. We're very mindful of that. But from a practicality point of view, someone who might have had photos done 10 years ago and they've since had 3 kids, their wall fallen, more grey hairs, weight has gone up or down or in between. What would you recommend in terms of kind of like an average timeline for assessing your kind of media package?
It would be 3 to 5 years. It really shouldn't go over 5 years, because people do change. And when you put an image out there, you change over 5 years, and a photograph looks like it's 5 years. The style changes, your hair changes, whether you have a beard or no beard, the type of makeup that you might use will change. And people meet you after 5 years and realise it's an old photograph. And it just sets a barrier there that doesn't need to be there. Most people will change their images around about the 3-year mark. Some people will change it more regularly. Like
that's interesting. Well, I think it's also, we live in such a digitized age that's your calling card going forward. And much like you said, if you imagine like dating, if someone has a photo up, we've all seen the funny movies where someone has an image up and it doesn't necessarily represent the person they end up meeting, and maybe there's 30 or 40 years cropped off the photo. It's interesting to think that it's a small investment in how you present yourself going forward to people you may not have had the opportunity to meet otherwise, because your photo is international. It is on your LinkedIn profile, it's on whatever platform you decide to use, and people almost undervalue the impact that can have by the correct presentation and an up-to-date
It is
photo.
the first impression that somebody's getting, and it is that people will build an impression on the image, and the amount of effort you've put into the image. That's the other thing that people don't realise, that if you see a phone shot taken in a party on somebody's LinkedIn, they're not as serious a business person as somebody who's gone to the effort of making a really good image from a professional photographer. It's that effort. If they've made that effort, they're going to make that effort for me as a client. So you're putting that image out there straight away when you...
And that's quite universal, because I mean, in my line of work in property, it can be considered stuffy at times because it has to be a suit and tie and there's a way of doing things and all that kind of stuff. But I also think in this post or during COVID era, whatever way we call it in 2022, the dynamic element of people's personality and professionalism can kind of almost perform a hybrid approach. So you could have someone that has a few different examples of how they want to come across in business, depending on the type of work they have. So they have a requirement where they have a suit and tie, and they have a requirement where they might be a little bit more casual. But like you said, that then plays a role in how they want to present themselves, which is how you pull that out of them at the beginning of the process.
Well, again, in the session that I would do, we normally end up with 3 different images, at least 3 to 4 different images. So somebody can have the very serious business image with the suit and tie on, and a more levitous image where they're wearing something slightly more casual with a different background. So that's part of the package that would be done in the 90-minute session. And the studio is geared to changing things really quickly, so we don't have to waste time on kind of whanging backgrounds around the place. So just one chappie came into me one time recently here, and he had his guitar with him, but he wanted a business profile shot, but he also wanted a shot with his guitar and for his kind of music output. And we were able to shoot the suit and tie, and very serious, a bit less serious with the tie off and that, and then change the studio with 5 or 6 minutes effort, and we were able to get a really nice photograph of him playing his guitar with a completely different lighting setup, and it worked for him, and it's now up on his music, what do you call that? What's the Spotify? He has on Spotify.
So it showed that in the same sitting you got 2 different people.
So it gave 2 different personalities, completely different personalities of the same guy in the same session, and that's what I kind of specialise in doing. But
it also means you're doing your job, because it means it correctly to its fullest, where you're able to capture that person. He had his job, which was it pays the bills, and his passion. And in the same setting, you were able to create 2 different feelings, 2 different almost emotions in how someone comes across. Yeah. And I'm in your studio here, and one of the most fascinating things I see is when I see the likes of the breadth of images that you have, and it's everything from, I know you've got kind of artwork style where you've reviewed tattoo pieces, which is obviously very unique, especially in a progressive Ireland now, and you've also got landmarks within Ireland. What would be your favourite either subjects, or products to take photos of or to be a part of?
Well, I mean, outside of the professional side of things, as that, I have this passion for photographing megaliths, and it's a kind of thing that I'm working towards an exhibition on at some point. But ancient stones around the country, and there's some of the most wonderful ancient stones around Ireland that are kind of 5,000 and 6,000 years old, and they tell a story of, because they're stretched across Europe, they tell a story about where we as Celts came from, because of the way they're constructed and what they are as burial grounds and ceremonial places. And to be in those places that were here and used by human beings 5,000 and 6,000 years ago. An amazing experience to do. So I love photographing that. That's something that I actually love doing. I've got a blog out there on it. But shooting people is the real passion. I like shooting people. The body art or the tattoos was one. It's an ongoing project, again heading towards an exhibition. So looking for anybody with decent body art. The most important thing about body art is a lot of people who do full body art, they're telling a story. Well, they have stories to tell in that body art, and I love relating that part of it, the story that they're trying to tell through their body art.
Well, underlying what you're saying there with your passion for the megalith style, that in itself is a story. So it's a timeline
story,
in history.
Yeah.
So you can see that there's that real sensitive, kind of a sensitive curiosity as to the things that make things the way they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're not just sitting someone on a chair taking a photo and John has had his photos taken, he can like it or lump it and he's gone. You can see in what you do, and I can see it on your artwork around the walls, that you're not just doing it for the sake of it. You're kind of delving into the background of it, the foundations of a story. And that's why I think it's actually very interesting from the tattoo point of view, because that's something that's unique. And we all know someone who has either one tattoo that they regret or one tattoo they love.
Yeah.
But both tell a story in that person's lifetime, which I think is really interesting. So we might have to encourage any tattoo-related corporations or people who are looking to discuss it further with David to make contact. And on that note, in terms of following on from your passion, what would have been the most unusual or most kind of unique project that you would have worked on over the course of your many decades in business?
Yes, well, one was quite recently actually, was for a job for CARI, the group that look after helping abused children out of their situation, and this tree came in donated by a sculptor, and it was a very interactive tree, so children can get comfortable in the surroundings of their offices, exploring this tree. And it's quite a sizable thing, so it has branches coming out over their heads and everything else. So it really is set up looking like their own little forest with a fairy door and all this. And just being part of that project and making images for them to use in their social media to promote the whole thing was quite an interesting project. And it was kind of one of my little hobby horses that I did for them, because it was an interesting concept of getting children comfortable when you know where they're coming from. So that was a lovely project to be part of. Unusual. Shooting in factories is always great. You get to see how things are made, and then you get to make images of the people doing what's going on. Working in a steel factory where there's kind of people working away and it's all mucky and dirty, and making a really, really good image of that. It's a challenge, but it's very satisfying when you get it done. So that's a lot of fun.
And also, I think that also falls in line with when people have an assumption of photography. I think almost like the best photos I've seen of, say, for example, weddings or any activity where there's been photography, is the moments they capture in between when you're made to stand and act happy and say cheese. You're catching someone who's taking a sneaky bite of a cake, or you're catching someone who's maybe whispering into a loved one's ear, or whatever it might be. And when you say that, you're taking what would normally, as from a general layman's point of view, a manufacturing setting, which is steel workers, or a factory setting, which is quite clinical, doesn't seem to have any personality, but you might catch that moment where someone is smelting someone, moving something, or having that kind of interaction as part of their daily production line, and you've caught that moment and made it interesting and unique. Yeah,
one of the things is you catch the moment, but it could take 20 minutes to get that moment. I would take a situation and I would use the lights that I have in the factory and surround myself with that. So I'm making a studio, make the image, and that's going to be an image that company is going to use as an advertising. This is what we do, and we look cool doing it. And that's kind of an important thing. Again, it's that story of the business, that it isn't just an anonymous guy turning stuff out. This is the guy who's doing the work, and he's happy there, and it makes it look good, and he's skilled at what he does. And by making a really, really high quality image in that space, it tells that story.
And that actually, as you say it, that has quite a similarity to what you're doing in a corporate profile shot, because you're almost taking what could be a stagnant single image, and you are taking the time to look at the deeper part of, well, how can we make factory A look different to competitor be up the road when they both have 20,000 square feet of metal? How are you going to make it different? And it's those individual moments and giving the time.
Individual, yes.
Which I really think is fascinating. And I suppose we've talked about those projects. Although you make it sound easy, what's been the biggest challenge when working with someone or something? Now, you don't have to talk anyone down, but more the kind of, maybe it's the logistical element of it or the creative end of it.
Yeah, the couple of things is again back to, people are very nervous about having their photograph taken, and some people don't want to be seen in a corporate brochure, and that can cause problems. But again, that is just kind of back to communicating with the people, telling them what you're doing, tell them how you're going to do it and what it's going to be used for, and showing them, I would carry a tablet around with me to show them samples of what I've done before in the same space, so they can relate to what I'm going to do and understand that they've got their PPE, they've got all their gear on, and they're working there, and not necessarily that they won't be recognised, but it's not really about their individual, it's the person rather than Michael who's working there. It's about the person working on the machine or doing whatever it is that they do in there. So the communication side, explaining to them what is going on, it always helps through those sort of situations. And some people get very, they really love the idea of being in a photograph, particularly when you're bringing in the big studio lights and putting it all around them. It becomes quite an exciting time for a person like that, because if you're working in a factory all day and you're doing the same thing over and over, the distraction is always quite nice.
You're breaking the monotony, and it's something unique. But I suppose also one of the unique things for someone else who doesn't see it is, we all take for granted how an actor, when they press action, that they're on, that they just understand what needs to be done by virtue of their profession, and they start acting. Whereas it might take you far longer. So if you're working with someone for 90 minutes, you might get the golden shots in the last 5 to 10 minutes.
Very often,
having built to that moment, because you know what to expect, but you have to have the patience and also the sensitivity to someone's requirements to let them kind of hold space with them. You can let them come to that stage where they kind of come out a glint at the end, and then they realise, oh, it wasn't that bad, and then you caught.
And that's usually what happens. People can say, that wasn't as painful as I thought it was going to be. So that's quite good, and it generally speaking can end up quite a bit of fun, because you don't always want dead serious shots, whether it be working shots in a factory or whether it be in the studio with corporate shots, or even on location you might be shooting. They don't always have to be dead serious. Bringing a levitous element into it allows the personality of somebody to be seen in their workplace. The guy working with the machine, I won't always have them working on the machine hands-on. They could be just standing beside it and kind of leaning on it and interacting with me, the client, rather than the photographer. So I'm here and I'm doing this job, and it builds a trust again for the client to see, this is the man that who's making the stuff that I'm using. And it's there.
I think one of the most important things that we probably can forget when we get lost in the 9 to 5 is that behind every job, behind every role, is a person who likes playing sports, doesn't like playing sports, has a certain way about them, and that's what makes us all quite unique. And the opportunity people have working with you is to express that, whether they realise it or not. It doesn't mean they have to have a guitar, but it could be a glint in their eye where they appeal to someone who says, that's a service that I thought was a bit stuffy, and that person seems like they're approachable. Maybe I'll contact. And that's your another opportunity to build on a business, build brand awareness, or create relationships in a similar area of business, which is something that most people probably overlook.
Well, they say when you're selling that people don't buy product, they buy from people. They don't buy from a company, they buy from people. So building that relationship and building that approachability, no matter what it is, whether it be your auctioneer valuer, right up to the corporate CEO, has to look approachable. And that's where that kind of slightly levitous, just not quite dead serious, particularly in today's element of that people are more aware of the life balance thing, that it's not all about work, it is about the personality that you're dealing with, and they kind of have to feel that approachability to
and
it.
It's having that openness to it as well, I think. So on to our last question, which would be, I was going to ask you actually, before that I'm going to ask you because I wasn't too sure, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What would your views be on tech and photography as an art form? So, the benefits and the drawbacks, because I think when we look at it, you will have someone that captures a shot 20 years ago, and the shot is the shot. They get it developed in the back room, and it could come out and it could be beautiful, or it may not. Whereas now you can make something perfect if you want it to be, or you can make something, you can include something in an image, whether it was there or not. What's your viewpoint on that?
There's two elements. That one is in the kind of art world is one thing. When you're doing corporate portraiture, you have to be more careful because you are dealing with the person, and that person has to be seen. I have a kind of a rule which I learned from a couple of other photographers have come up with this rule, and you're talking about the blemishes on faces. If it's going to be there in 2 weeks, it stays. If it's going to be gone in 2 weeks, I'll edit it out. On the art side of things, people say, "Oh, but the moon wasn't there when you took the shot, and the sky wasn't like that." I'm thinking it is art, and if you take, say, Constable, one of the best known landscape artists, when he was standing with his easel, that tree wasn't where it is in the picture. That haywing wasn't there exactly, and those plants on the side of the tree. He put that into the composition from various elements. So in art, there's always been Photoshop. It's just done with a brush. So changing things slightly, as long as you're not saying this is what was going on, as long as you're not kind of putting down it as a fact, as long as you're saying it is art, it is creative, and that's part of the creative element in it. So maneuvering something to make a composition, maneuvering something to get a colour matching, it's all part of art. So it's the same as using a paintbrush. You are putting things where you need them to be for the composition. So,
and also what's interesting is the two differences you gave, which is in a corporate setting, like you said, there has to be that authenticity. So it's a quality and consistency, and it has to be an image that's clear and crisp and attracts attention in the right ways. But you're also not going to change it in such a way where someone feels duped when they either meet someone or they had a glint of a personality that may not have been what was meant. And then the converse of that is, in the art world, it's all open to interpretation. But it sounds funny when you say it, that Photoshop was around before Photoshop, but just in a different form.
In different format, yeah.
That's interesting. And now this is my last question. So I was originally going to skip the first one, but I didn't. So the last question for this podcast is, who or what is your dream subject to work with? So let's take it outside of the what you think would be your base here in Dublin and Dún Laoghaire. What would be your ideal person or project to work with?
When you're working with people who are used to being in front of the camera, you can be a lot more creative. When people are nervous in front of the camera, you have to take that into account in the amount of pushing of the envelope of what you're going to do with the creative side of the lighting and that. When you're working with somebody, and I've worked with a couple of actors down through the years, and they know, they're sitting there, they know how to produce the face that they need to produce, and they're very comfortable with lights being moved around them because that's who they are. So yeah, working with people like that is always a joy, and you can create interesting images in that way. As far as outside the studio, again, I have this kind of dream of retiring and taking my car and the missus and heading off across Europe to follow the Trail of the Celts and all those megaliths that they built from the Urals across to Europe, and photographing them in different settings. That would be, if you're asking me what I really want to end up doing, that's what I'd love to be doing.
And you mentioned the car before the missus. Is the missus
as
pragmatic? She is passionate about it as you are?
It's her car, so yeah.
So you're taking the missus's car.
The missus's car. But the car is going to do all the hard work getting us around. So I mentioned the car first. It is our baby after all. So.
And out of interest, how long do you think that would take if you were to do that passion project?
Oh God, it's a long way from here to the Urals. It'd be kind of a month. It'd be kind of taking 3 or 4 months out and just doing it.
Supposed to be your version of the Camino de Santiago, kind of.
It would be, yes, yeah. Except instead of walking, you're doing it in the car and following a different trail and following it in reverse order.
Yeah.
So you're kind of following it from the final settlement back to where it all started. So
I think that's fascinating, but it also gives people who may want to engage with you an understanding of you, as opposed to, so you've kind of pulled a little bit of your personality out in this podcast to tell us about yourself, what interests you, and that's important because when people meet you, they need to see that authenticity. And you never know, you might get a few megalith subscribers to your website. You never know.
Well, I follow megalithic hunters, as they call themselves, and they follow me, and that's always a bit of fun because you learn a lot from them about the whole story of it going across Europe.
And I would make a joke about you being stone mad to do something like that, but it mightn't be appropriate in that setting.
Yeah. One of my favourite books, actually, Stone Mad Murphy, about a stonecutter. Very good book.
Oh, very good. So we're having a podcast about photography stones, and we're also plugging
A very old book, James Murphy. Yeah, no cousin.
Well, that's gas. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you today, and it was a pleasure chatting with you. And if anyone has any questions, we'll put all your details in the show notes. But it's David Murphy, who's a specialised corporate photographer based in Dublin. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for another show. If you have any comments, questions, or want to get in touch, I would love to hear from you. If you like what you hear, please feel free to share with colleagues, family, and friends. Until next time, I've been your host, Andrew Rattigan, and you have been listening to Property People.